Hi, I'm Diana Ideus with Hawthorne Union. I'm also an MCC with the ICF and want to talk about the PCC markers. So if that just sounds like a lot of jargon, this video is designed to show you some of the criteria that coaches are assessed on for the International Coaching Federation. You don't have to know all of that terminology. It can just be best practices. But for those of you pursuing an ICF credential at the PCC level, this is what PCC coaches are assessed on. Now, there is an exception to this. If you are a level 3 or ACTP program, your program will likely have your exam and your assessment and take care of your credentials. So don't freak out if it feels a little bit different. However, as an ICF assessor, when coaches apply through the portfolio path or the ACSTH path or level 1 or level 2, or if you were trained in a non-ICF approved program and you're applying for an ICF credential, then the PCC markers are what you're evaluated on. So the coachfederation.org is the ICF. There's a ton of information here. You can reach out to us at Hawthorne Union. It's Hawthorne with an E. We have a resource page. Feel free, info@Hawthorne Union, if we can answer questions for you or help you through this journey. So I find it easiest to just look in the search bar for PCC markers. So the PCC markers were rolled out to help make the credentialing process less subjective. So what is the coach actually saying or doing? How do we know that the coach is coaching at a professional level? So if you're going for ACC, these are likely a lot of the same behaviors you're going to be pursuing. If you're going for MCC are evaluated a little bit differently, but these are the things that your ICF assessors are looking for. Now, the key is that this is not a checklist. You can't just go kind of top to bottom, but they are behaviors. It brings the core competencies and the ethics to life. So because it's before August 1st, 2022, right now on the website, there's current markers versus updated markers. We're going to be transitioning as of August 1st to updated markers. So if you're watching this after August 1st, 2022, and this looks a little different, it's likely because the other ones will get archived or backlogged. Go ahead and download these, have it. I recommend you print it out. They're available in a lot of languages. So make sure that you have it. It's a handy resource if you're learning how to improve your coaching, but also especially if you're going for that ICF credential. So the previous markers look like this. I'm going to reference them a little bit because there are some markers that got sunsetted and are not in the new version. And I think that those still have some value. So making sure that that I'm sharing those with you and you see some of the tips and tricks. But we're going to, for the most part, use the updated version. So the updated version has the updated logo. And so just taking it from the top. So demonstrates ethical practice. So this is where we're leveraging ICF ethics, that we're committed to growing, that we have that confidentiality. The embodies a coaching mindset. It references a number of markers. So again, this doesn't have to be like a checklist, but this is why I recommend you print it out in whatever language that you speak, so you can reference this at sea. Another resource is RAE Notes, RAE Notes, where you can actually upload the transcripts and you can code it and you may not want to do that unless you're a mentor or an assessor. But sometimes my mentees find it helpful to look at, okay, what am I saying? What does my language look like? So when we think about embodying a coaching mindset from an ICF perspective, it's really seeing the client as resourceful and whole and taking out all the consulting, the teaching, for the most part, the recommendations and things like that. So embodying a coaching mindset, it doesn't mean you can't coach differently, but if you're going for an ICF credential, it's referencing these markers to say, hey, take a closer look. So for those of you who are familiar with me and Hawthorne Union, there's a video on the resource page, hawthorneunion.com/resource, where it's called Structure Bookends. And I actually walk through, using the former markers, how much the markers at the beginning for establishing and maintaining agreement and the markers at the end for facilitate client growth really make nice bookends. So check out the bookend structure video. It's shorter than this video. Check that out if you want just some quick tips. This video will go a little bit more in depth because some of my mentees have requested some additional time. So what does it actually sound like? So partnering with the client to identify or reconfirm what they want to talk about today. Hey, what did you bring to the session today? What do you want to make sure we cover? So I'm going to give language variations. Don't ask both of those things. Don't stack the questions on the client. I'm telling you how I say it, but some of the coaching journey is figuring out how you say it. We're not trying to make ICF robots that check things down a checklist. That's not coaching, but looking at how do you actually cover the competencies in a way that feels authentic to you and your voice and matches your client. But 3.1 is a simple one. What do you want to talk about today? Asking how they want to measure success. What's success going to look like when you walk away? What do you want to make sure you take away from this session? 3.3 really changed my coaching. It turned me from a PCC to an MCC. What would it be like if, or what would change for you if? So just for example, what do you want to focus on today? Well, I'm feeling really stressed out. And I think if we talk about time management, okay, so if time management is our focus, or potentially managing some of your stress is our focus, what do you want to make sure you walk away with at the end of this session? Well, it would be helpful to have some strategies or some tips. Obviously, the client has to think about it. It doesn't necessarily happen as fast. What would it be like if you had those strategies and tips? Or what would it be like if you didn't have that stress when it came to managing your time or managing your life? The session just deepened, right? So that's something as coaches are going for the PCC level and also the MCC level, we're looking for you to be coaching the person, not the topic. Like what's the holistic approach? How is it coming up for a person? So honestly, 3.3 is one of my favorites. 3.4, I don't usually do. I do it with groups in group coaching, but in individual coaching, I don't usually do 3.4. That doesn't mean it's not a great marker, but that's an example of you don't have to hit every single marker to be successful in your coaching. So how I would say this is just, what do you think we need to address or resolve? Or, you've mentioned time management, you've mentioned a level of stress, you've mentioned wanting to feel lighter. What do you want to make sure we cover today so that you get what you're looking for out of this session? So that's an example of 3.4. One of the markers I got sunsetted, which I'm just going to go ahead and show you here because I do think it was helpful, is then coach continues conversation in client's desired direction, essentially. This one comes up later. It kind of got woven in later. But the reason I bring you back to the old markers, so if you watch the structure of bookend video, it's using these previous markers. What I like to do is say, what do you want to talk about today? What do you want to make sure you take away from the end of the session? What would it be like if you took that away? And where do you want to start? So for me, that's a natural flow at the beginning of the session. So part of creating the coaching agreement is creating the coaching agreement outside of the particular session. But to me, that makes it a little bit easier. So that's why I want to pull, at the risk of confusing you and adding another marker that's been sunsetted, I want to pull that one back because sometimes it can be hard to know, well, how do I transition? They've said all this stuff that they wanted. We're trying to solve everything in 30 minutes or 60 minutes. Where do we go? It's not your role as a coach to pick. So part of coaching presence is making sure that we're handing that agenda back to the client. So I like to, at the end of kind of establishing and maintaining agreements, say, like, where would you like to start? So transitioning then everything else happens organically and all meshed together. So establishing the coaching agreement happens at the beginning. But what I also want to say is it's never too late to establish a coaching agreement. So if you're 10 minutes in, if you're 15 minutes in and you don't know where you're going, you can always circle back and just be like, hey, I just want to check in. You mentioned that you wanted to focus on this, or you mentioned you wanted to feel lighter. How are we doing? Or it seems like the content of this session has shifted, or maybe what you want has shifted from this session. Where should we go now? So think of establishing and maintaining agreements, whether you want to think of it as a bookend or an anchor. The coaching agreement, like if you're lost, you want to go back to that. The rest of them, it's kind of a free for all and they can happen anytime. So coach acknowledge and respects clients' unique talents. I mean, honestly, like just celebrate. Like, are they being self-aware? I really want to honor or recognize you. I say phrases like that, but I say phrases like that because those phrases are authentic to me. So you have to figure out if this is a marker you check. It may be like, what number is it? I can't even remember. It may be like 3.4. It may be one you don't really hit. For me, this is one where we just kind of celebrate, like, wow, you've really done a lot of work on this, or I want to honor the commitment that you have had in these sessions, just kind of celebrating what the client's bringing to the table. Usually 4.2 isn't much of a stretch. So showing support and empathy, be careful you don't lean too far in. We don't want to lean so far in to kind of their pain is our pain. You don't want to lean so far into 4.1 that you're just cheerleading. Sometimes your client's not going to reply or respond to that. We want the clients to be able to recognize themselves, but also, my premise for the book Listen is no one listens like coaches listen. So we see things and what we say is valuable and important. So just even holding the space to recognize, it sounds like you've been managing a lot through this time, or I just want to express my, that I'm impressed with how much you're holding here. So we want to be careful in infusing our opinions. But as you can see, even in the examples I'm getting, I'm kind of mixing 4.1 and 4.2. That's okay. When you say something that is neutral, that supports the client, that builds trust with the client, it will often hit multiple markers. If that thing is also an open-ended question or a recommendation you're not attached to, it's going to hit multiple markers. So that's part of why it's not a checklist, is because it happens in the session. But as assessors who are evaluating calls, we're looking for this behavior. And the reason that when you turn in your ICF portfolio, you have to turn in transcripts with timestamps is because we as assessors have to timestamp when this happened. So did they do 4.1? Did they do 4.2 kind of thing? So 4.3, to me, we want to make space. We want to acknowledge and support when the client is being expressive. This is also a point where you may want to challenge. It sounds like this or this are true. Do those feel like your only options? Now, that one I said do, which makes it a little bit more of a leading question, but sometimes I'm actually just trying to understand, and we're trying to understand our client's map of the world. So, but just acknowledging and supporting, making space for that. Sometimes people aren't supported to fully express themselves. One of the ways this comes up as well is just that we're not interrupting them and we're making space for them. So we partner with the client to invite them to respond. So if and when you are reflecting something back or giving an insight, whether it's from your intuition or a trend that you've noticed, we want to do so neutrally. So I always like to, as a default, have the client label. I'll say things very neutrally, like it sounds like there's some emotion there. What's coming up for you? Or what's coming up as I reflect that back? Or how does that resonate with you? So I use very neutral language to make sure that I'm not labeling my clients unintentionally. However, when we do say something like, I see the shift, or I hear the change in your tone. If the client is like, no, there's no shift, my tone didn't change, right? Like, it's not about us, it's about the client. So this is a partnership, but also the client is in the driver's seat. So if you think about actually going down a path, if you're like, hey, it looks like maybe we should turn right, and they're like, no, I don't want to turn right there, they're the driver. Like, we don't mess with the driver. You let the driver go. It doesn't mean you don't point out that, the way we're headed, this path may be more efficient, but you want to do so without attachment. If it feels like, oh, we need to go this way, we're supposed to go this way, you're getting out of coaching presence and into consulting mode. So if you can't say it without attachment, be careful with that one. But if you can say it to truly partner with the client and trust that they'll choose what's best for them, then it is important that we're offering up our insights. So in the spirit of maintaining presence, and this kind of comes back to the idea of like the person who wanted to talk about time management. We want to look at the whole person, like coaching the person and not just the topic. Well, you want to talk about time management. You want to talk about strategic planning. What is that going to do for you? What is that going to change for you? How does that impact your life? So again, don't ask all those questions at once. Clients can only answer one at a time, but I'm just offering sample language so that you have a couple options. What are you learning about yourself And how does that apply outside of this context, right? It's not whatever awareness the client is creating or whatever growth is happening for them, it doesn't necessarily apply only in that aspect. So helping clients look at, or if someone comes in and they're like, okay, this is a session we're focused on succession planning, but it seems like they've had a really hard day or like they just seem a little off. It's just saying, hey, I just wanted to check in. It seems like there may be a lot going on. Does this still feel like the right time to talk about this? Does this topic still feel like it's resonating with you? It seems like there might be some resistance or some emotion coming up. Is that something you want to address? We want to look at the whole person. For some people as well, this is potentially saying things like, where does that come up in your body, or how is this manifesting in your life? So all of that's 5.1. We do still want to honor what the client says that they want to cover as far as a topic, but don't hold it so tight. It's up to the client to determine what they want to talk about. It's up to us to say if it seems like we've shifted directions. Hey, you mentioned you wanted pizza, and now it seems like we're headed towards tacos. I just want to check in and make sure we're going where you want to go, right? It's not adhering them to pizza or tacos. We want to give them those choices. You'll see the word partners, coach partners often, by supporting the client to choose what happens in the session. So what I said about like, hey, pizza or tacos, are we going somewhere else? I said to a client once, they said something really significant, but then they were telling me something. So then when they paused, I was like, well, you mentioned this. Is that something you want to explore? And they thought about it and they said, good catch, not today. And I said, okay. And then we just kept going. So it's the kind of like the flag on the play to say, hey, is there something here? Do you want to explore this? There's so much happening in a coaching session, but at the same time, knowing where to drop a pin or saying, are we shifting directions is important. And ultimately it's up to the client. Coaches demonstrating curiosity is, I think that's most coaches are curious, right? We have a lot of questions. We want to make sure we're not peppering our clients to death with questions. So balance that. Also, I am not a fan of tell me more. There's nothing wrong with it. However, I've trained enough coaches who used to be consultants. Tell me more gives you more context that the client already has. If you ask a question like, what's coming up for you, or what traits are associated with that, or what does success look like, or what would you like to commit to? You're asking a question that they don't know the answer to. Tell me more is asking a question that they already know, and it's just building up your information as a coach. So that like closed-ended questions is not a deal breaker, but in general, I don't recommend tell me more. So, but be curious. And part of being curious is not having a talk track in your head, being like, oh my God, what am I supposed to say? And how do I ask the perfect question? And I don't know if this is the right thing, but just holding that space and being curious with our client. 5.5 is one of my favorites. Oh, you got to make space, allow for silence, for pause, for reflection. If you're truly coaching someone to change their life, whether that's a professional setting or a personal setting, whether that's a small change or a large change, sometimes they need a minute. Sometimes they need time to process. Also, as coaches, you are likely more comfortable with silence than they are. So then either they're thinking or they'll break the silence for you and ask you to repeat the question, or are you still there, kind of thing. Just breathe. Give it a minute. If you get super anxious in silence and you talk and you're verbally processing, more than likely what's happening is you're asking a question and you're stacking all the questions on top of each other. Like, chill out, right? So my book, Listen, Mentor Coaching for Coaches, which is available on hawthorneunion.com. And there's also podcasts about it on Cross Street Coaching. So check those out. Talks about, I think silence is one of the most underutilized coaching tools. So definitely, if you can turn anything up, turn up the silence, because if we're talking, we're not listening. So make some space in there for your clients. If you're being paid as a consultant, then of course, what you say. If you're coaching more on a corporate side where they're expecting you to have more consulting, that's understandable. However, for the International Coaching Federation and to truly build your coaching muscles, you need to have the client, hold the client as resourceful and whole, see them in the driver's seat, And that means when there's silence, it really gives them a chance to drive and reflect. So I have a soapbox on that one. All right. So in that silence, you're listening actively. So questions and observations are customized. This just means that you're listening. I actually ask really generic questions, but I will often pay attention to repetitive words that my clients use. And so that's actually then integrating the 6.2. And sorry, I'm just moving my Zoom. Okay. So I'll say, hey, the word space has come up a number of times, or anytime someone says should or boundaries, it's almost guaranteed there's something underneath there. Not that you want to explore it. When you're asking questions, go towards the desired state. Don't say like, oh, that heaviness you're feeling, like what is making it heavy, or what's the worst case scenario? I caution you on those. Move more what I call up and out towards desired state. Like, what does success look like? What's the best possible scenario? So I'm saying this because I ask very generic questions, but when I ask them is customized based on what I'm learning about the client. And then when I customize them, it is with the client's language. If I use my language, the client has to translate. If I use the client's language, they don't have to translate. So repetitive words, phrases, images. On the PCC level, if your client uses an image or a metaphor, unless the coaching session is completely full of them, your assessor is going to likely expect for you to at least touch on it, if not explore it. You mentioned your gears are grinding. What would it be like if they didn't grind? So see how instead of saying what's grinding your gears, which yes, does 6.1 and 6.2, but we've gone kind of into the darkness of it. It's, what would it be like if your gears weren't grinding? Or, what's the opposite of your gears grinding? Oh, well, I'd be free as a bird. Okay, so what changes for you if you're free as a bird, right? So you're there, those are customized. We're using the client's language. We are exploring some emotion. So it doesn't, again, you don't have to do all of these, but is there emotion there? One of the ways that these kind of overlap, especially with 6.4, is the nonverbal cues. So something that is in the old markers, and this really transformed my coaching, is 5.4. So tone, pace of speech, or inflection. So when the ICF updated the markers, they streamlined them. They made them smoother. They, consolidated. I will say that there's so much in tone and so much in nonverbal. You can be watching a video of, or even listening to a phone call of a language you don't speak, and you'll be able to tell from tone, from body language, what's happening, how those people are feeling, what emotions are there. So honestly, as humans, think about if you have a pet, your pet is monitoring 6.3 and 6.4 all the time, right? They keep a close eye on their humans. They know how you're doing and if they can get what they want or not. So a lot of times I think these are happening in the background and we're not even aware of them. These are low-hanging fruit. As much as possible, going back to 6.3, I prefer that you don't label their emotion. You ask them what emotion is present. So I will say, it sounds like there's some emotion there for you. And again, if they're like, nope, I don't have any emotion there, or nope, I don't want to talk about it, right? With the markers that we already covered, you let that go, right? It's not about like, oh no, your tone changed and I know this about you. No. It's just, we're creating awareness. Or evoking awareness, as it's now called. So ask as relevant about emotions. If it's not coming up in your session, that's okay. They're not all going to come up. I pay very close attention to tone, because tone, pace of speech, repetitive words, it's some of how I listen, but also I was an English major and I was an English teacher. So the tone and the words, and the metaphors, that's part of my history. Like, we bring who we are before we start coaching impacts how we coach. So don't think that you have to make 3.3 and 6.4 your favorite markers just because they were very transformative to me. I just want to share some of my journey in case it helps you on yours. Okay. So inquires or explores how the client currently perceives themselves or their world. So this is just part of curiosity to say like, well, you know, what's that mean to you? Or what's coming up for you? I think this is where people start to say, tell me more about, but try to keep you out of their session. So, you know, when that happens, what comes up for you? So you hear me taking it back to the client. So you could say, when that happens, what do you do? That's focused on the what. But when that happens, what's coming up for you? That's focusing on the person, which is often bigger, more whole person, or transcends the what. Coach allows the client to complete speaking without interrupting. Watch this one. If you are newer or you talk a lot, be careful you're not clipping your client or like so excited for them to stop talking that you jump in. That's going to grate on your coaching presence. You need to make some space for them. You need to listen. You need to calm down, like back down, calm down. The client's in the driver's seat. However, if there is a purpose, like if they're, you know, line cut out, or if you're stepping in to say, hey, you know, I just want to check in. It sounds like there's a lot there. We have 5 minutes left before we need to wrap up. And I want to make sure that we're closing in a place that feels good for you. So if I have to interrupt a client, which is rare, I will often say, I'm going to pause you there. So I just want to pause you there. And because, you know, it's a polite interruption. A time that I do interrupt is if someone is like spiraling or venting. So sometimes I'll say, look, I'm going to pause you there. I can tell there's a lot of emotion for you. And I want to make sure that we're focused on what's in your control. So that's me trying to ground the client in the session. So that would be a stated purpose to interrupt. Otherwise, it's just don't interrupt the client. So succinctly reflects or summarizes. So the key here is succinctly, and I would reflect more than summarize. If you understand what your client is saying, I recommend you don't summarize. Now, some people would disagree with me, and active listening can be defined by mirroring back. It was interesting. I had a DEI practitioner talk to me about the value and importance of the kind of exact mirror to confirm that someone is heard. So I think that's great perspective. I think that's important because we want to make sure people feel heard. In the coaching aspect, I'm going to disagree. Unless you're clarifying because you don't understand. I'm sorry, did you say this or this? Or, you know, can you repeat that? Or, you know, if it's a bigger level summary, like, you know, it sounds like that situation was really upsetting to you. Again, I prefer not labeling it as upsetting. If you as the coach need clarity, that's one thing. Oh, interesting. It says ensure clients clarity and understanding. That's one thing. In general, though, I think summary is often overused. Coaches are new. They don't really know what to do. They don't really know what to say. Let me summarize all the things. The thing is that the deeper you go, the more coaching can be kind of a wild journey with all of these paths. And so trying to summarize all of those twists and turns, that's not the best use of your skill. So often I'll just be like, wow, that was a lot. And then I pause in case they have more to say. And they'll say, where would you like to go? So again, you hear me partnering the clients in the driver's seat. So unless you need clarity, I personally recommend ease up on the summary. All right. Evokes awareness. So this is one that for me, I was a little light in. So we all, as coaches, just like as people, we have strengths and challenges. So this is one that I had to kind of lean into and develop a little bit more. So one of the things I would do at the end of the session is ask, like, what are you taking away from this time? But one of the things we want to think about with evokes awareness is how can you be evoking awareness throughout the session? So, you know, how are they feeling? How does that match with their values or their needs or their beliefs? You know, if we're creating awareness in the session to say, you know, I'm hearing a lot of passion there, or it sounds like that's really important to you. Or, you know, your tone changed when you started talking about this. What's coming up for you? All of that's evoking awareness, because even though we as coaches are likely noticing these things, the most important thing is for our clients to be noticing them, our clients to be hearing them. All right, so we want to ask questions about the who and the what. More than likely, if you're newer to coaching, you've got the what locked in. Be careful. Sometimes they're like, when are you going to do that? And what would that look like? I call that blood in the water. Be careful. Don't be a shark and go after that blood. Hold it with a little bit looser of a grip. And how much are you asking about the who? Okay. So it's great that they feel prepared to go into their meeting and they have what they were going to say to their boss, but what are they learning about themselves? How can they apply that in other aspects? So that may be too big or too broad. Again, I'm just giving you some samples or kind of things to consider. So coach asks questions to help client explore beyond current thinking towards client desire. So that's up and out. How are we getting that towards that desired state? I asked this one pretty neutrally to say, what if there was another way to look at it? Or what does success look like? What could you try? How could you measure that? What would change for you? So as you see, some of the questions I'm asking are questions I ask for other markers. So the nice thing is that as you have this language that's very client-centered, you're focused on the client. My language is very direct and very neutral. Some of that is just my style. But you can hit multiple aspects with a well-phrased question, with a well-phrased pause, or with a well-phrased reflection. All right. So coming back to sharing without attachment. So this one, I would say, especially if you come from a consulting or management or mentoring or teaching background, use 7.5 sparingly, because if you have been paid to give people recommendations or to train people or to manage them, you are more likely to be attached to the recommendations that you make. So just be careful with this one. However, it's kind of what I said about like pizza versus tacos. It's like, hey, it seems like we're veering over here, or it sounds like there's a lot there for you. If I always like it better when the client comes up with the metaphors, and you can ask like, hey, is there an image that comes to mind? Is there a song is there a playlist? What's on the playlist of that? But if you are reminded of something or something is evoked for you, you can say it, just say it without attachment. So something that happened in one of my MCC exams, because I'm really careful with 7.5 because I don't want to overdo it, is I was talking to a client and there was something that shifted and I just had an automatic response. And I was like, oh, it sounds like you. Because before it hadn't sounded like her. And as soon as I said it, I was like, oh man, this is my MCC call. I'm not supposed to say things like that. But actually, no, I wasn't attached to it. If she had been like, no, I don't agree, that would have been fine. And then actually that insight, that intuition that just came flying out of my mouth was very helpful for her in the course of the session and actually was part of her takeaway. So what I always say to coaches that I'm training is if it's in your head, find a professional way to get it out of your mouth. We also want to keep in mind the acronym WAIT, which stands for why am I talking? So we do want to be sparing with the words. However, if you are going to offer something, your insights, your intuition, your observations, like you can likely see trends. You can't read the label inside the jar, right? You're outside of that jar. You can see the client. So it is important that you share succinctly at a high level, but when you share it without attachment. And if you feel like you can't share it without attachment, don't share it. Hey, you need to read this book. No, really, you need to read this book. Like, no, you just lost so many points on your coaching presence. And that's not 7.5. Okay. So primarily direct open-ended questions, one at a time, people, one at a time. So the one at a time is often what I hear and talk to mentees about, especially if you're a verbal processor and you'll try to rephrase the question or make it perfect. No, ask a question, stop. If they need clarity, they'll ask for it. If you don't get that second question, you can ask later. So don't get in a shame spiral if you're stacking or machine gunning the questions at your client, but be careful with the one at a time. Primarily open-ended means that most of your questions will be what or how, what changed for you? What does that look like? What's the first step? What's the step you can take? What support do you need? or how will we know? How will you know? How are you measuring success? If you're saying, did you, or do you, or is there, that's a closed-ended question. Now, often towards the end of the session, is there anything else you want to make sure we cover? I think that's fine. But you want to be primarily open-ended, especially if you have a client who doesn't say as much. If you're asking closed-ended questions, you're gonna get really short answers and you're gonna end up working really hard. You want to use language that's generally clear and concise. So this comes back to silence, right? Generally clear and concise, allow client to do most of the talking. The client should be talking. I like 80-20. For some of you, that may be pretty far off. I actually my mentees use RAE notes. So it's RAE notes. And one of the things it does is it shows you who's talking how often. And so sometimes a coach doesn't realize, oh, you're talking 50% of the time or 60% of the time. Well, if you were the consultant or the trainer or the teacher, that would perhaps be appropriate. But as a coach, we want to be asking questions, making reflections, not stacking a bunch of things on each other, and giving our clients that space to articulate. All right. So last but not least, so all of those other competencies kind of happen all the time. They're layered in, they're happening all the time. The establishing coaching agreement usually happens at the beginning. Facilitate client growth often happens at the end. So that's why I have the kind of what I call structure bookends, because the beginning and the end are more in your control as a coach, whereas the rest, you just have to lean in and be present and hold space. So 8.1 circles back to the coaching agreement. So if you didn't have a coaching agreement, you can't do 8.1 because you can't circle back to something that's not there. Now, it's not too late, but to say, hey, I want to check in and see how we're doing on what you wanted to take away from this time. Again, I say that super neutral, so I'm not trying to be so specific, because oftentimes, if you thought they were focusing on a topic and then all of a sudden you're focusing on the person, there's a lot of depth there, there's emotion there, the tones change, the body language has changed, there's a lot happening. So checking in with the client, how are we doing? Not necessarily even based on what you said you wanted, because sometimes what they want to changed, but what have you learned about yourself so far? That's evoking awareness. And what do you want to make sure we still cover before we wrap up this session? So it's just that pulse check, checking back in. Hey, we said we were going here. Where are we now? How are we doing? This is kind of alignment. In Listen, I call this the dance partner. You want to make sure you're stepping with your dance partner, not stepping all over their feet. If the dance changes, you change with your partner. You don't just say like, oh no, that's not the dance we're doing. We want to see, what have they learned about themselves? What have they learned as they process this? So it's interesting because Facilitates Clients Growth actually has a lot of Evokes awareness mixed in. We're creating the opportunity for the client to advance themselves, because you may see their progress or you may see their lack of progress. Either one of those things, we want the client to see it. So we can reflect that back and we can share those. But what is the client seeing? What are they experiencing? How are they going to use it? What do they want to commit to? What support do they need? So these competencies, there's a lot here. There's a lot of questions you can ask. Mine are always very high level. How are we doing on what you said you wanted to cover? What do you want to commit to? And what support do you need? And then I'll say, what are you taking away? Or is there anything else? I'm not huge on accountability. That's not really a marker that I hit. So actually when clients say that they want a coach that's really keeping them accountable, sometimes I'll say like, what does that mean to you? And sometimes we'll have to actually determine if that's a fit or not. I'm much more on the celebration side. So how are you going to celebrate? Like, what does that mean to you? I'm more likely to celebrate or honor the client's progress. Again, some of this is style. This isn't right or wrong. This isn't a checklist. It's not a report card. It's just, these are behaviors that your assessor is looking for to see how you're interacting with the client and whether your coaching is in alignment with ICF. And then partners with the client on how they want to complete the session. Is there anything else you want to cover? I always ask for takeaways. I ask the same question. So for those of you who are familiar with the coaching bookends or bookend structure video, the markers have changed, but my questions at the end haven't. So I ask the same questions at the beginning of a session, at the end of the session. It's pretty much, checking in on the agreement. You can do 8.1 at any time though. You don't have to wait till the end. You can do this in the middle. You can do it towards the end. If you feel like the client is not on track with you, or you're not tracking together, or you're not sure where the session is going, ask. Because sometimes what happens is the client's following your lead and you both are following each other and nobody knows where you are. And then, support. And I like to ask takeaways. What are they taking away? Because it hits a lot of these markers at once. So hopefully that has been helpful as far as looking at some potential language that you can take a look at. There's a lot of other resources through the ICF. Join us at Hawthorne with an E, hawthorneunion.com. Would love to support you in your journey, and best wishes in your coaching development. Thank you.